Another change on the ownership front for the Timberwolves. Will Marc Stad, taking over as the new majority owner, have any impact on the day-to-day operations or the future of the Timberwolves in Minnesota? Next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of the daily Locked On Wolves show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting homer this MLB season. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Of course, big Timberwolves news that broke late last week. We're going to open the show talking about the ownership stuff and what to expect, or what might we be able to expect in both the short and long-term future with the Wolves. A little later in the show, though, I do want to get to the roster situation. We're getting to the point where teams are starting to fill up their two-way contracts. The Wolves still have an unsigned draft pick this year in Trey Kaufman-Renn. So we'll just talk about that outlook. Excuse me, that outlook, and also how the Wolves may end up using their two-way slots, any movement that could happen there at the end of the roster for the Wolves. And then in the middle today, I want to talk about Jonathan Kuminga. I mean, that's another rumor that won't die. And I'm recording this podcast late Sunday afternoon. Brian Windhorst had a report. We'll talk about this later on Friday, where he suggested the Kuminga thing could happen in the next few days and mentioned the Wolves as a team to watch. So we'll talk about Jonathan Kuminga in a little bit as well. But I want to start today with the ownership change, the update that happened to the Timberwolves ownership group. And I think update's probably the most accurate word to use. Officially, of course, what happened, according to Shams Charania, then also John Krasinski of The Athletic, that Marc Lore, who of course has been the majority owner, took over with Alex Rodriguez, started that process back over 5 years ago now, and then finally completely took over about 2 years ago. Of course, still the drama, about this time last year, related to Glenn Taylor still trying to be involved and all that. I guess that was 2 years ago now. So it's been a saga, but he's only really, Marc Lore, been the controlling majority owner for a couple of seasons now. He's selling. So, of course, when I first saw that report, it was like, oh, man, now what? But he's selling to Marc Stad, who's already a limited minority partner, or was a minority partner within the same ownership group. So he's long done business with Marc Lore, apparently has a very good relationship with Alex Rodriguez. That's something that was reported by, I think, John Krasinski was reporting that those two have a good relationship, Rodriguez and Stad. So really what's happening in this whole thing is Marc Lore is selling the controlling stake in the team, both the Timberwolves and the Lynx, to a current minority owner. They're almost just flipping positions. That's actually the like too long didn't read version, is Lore and Stad, both Marks, M-A-R-C without a K, or a C instead of a K. So interesting. Those two are flipping roles in essence. Like, we don't know the exact percent that Stad had previously or that Lore will have. I mean, that's unclear, but pretend like it's the same amount. They're just flipping. Marc Stad's now in control. Marc Lore is a minority partner and reportedly will still be involved in some of the larger projects, down the road, the new arena, et cetera, which eventually is going to happen. And also reported that Alex Rodriguez has increased his stake in both the Timberwolves and the Lynx and will remain the governor of the Lynx, which means essentially the representative for the ownership group when it comes to Lynx, and the alternate governor, I think, is the right terminology on the Timberwolves side. And Marc Stad's wife, who's actually very involved in all of their businesses and has an extensive business background as well, she's going to actually serve as the governor of the Timberwolves and be the primary contact for a lot of matters, it sounds like, day to day. And so again, the best way to summarize it is they're flipping. So Lore's still in the group. Stad's now in charge. Rodriguez increases his stake in both the Wolves and the Lynx and remains involved. Stad and Rodriguez have a close relationship, and it's been reported. I heard a couple different places, and then it was also reported by John Krasinski that Marc Lore wants to really focus on his company, Wonder, is now going public, or recently went public, and he wants to really focus on that from a day-to-day standpoint. And that means, like, it sounds like maybe he was checked out is a strong phrase, but that Lore wasn't as plugged in over the course of the last, year or so with the Wolves, which is interesting considering how short of a amount of time he's been there. And so why not cash in, right? They got the Wolves at a valuation of like 1.7 billion from Glenn Taylor. They're being sold now for 4.5 billion at that valuation. He retains a stake in the team, undoubtedly will be involved on some level, and now doesn't have to worry about being involved in the day-to-day stuff. And so you get it from Lauri's perspective if he's really worried. And actually, it's probably a good thing from the team side too. If he really was going to be distracted and more focused on Wonder and his other business ventures, then it's better that he's going to sell the team to Marc Stad and have him and his wife, spend more time, effort, resources, energy on the day-to-day operation of the Timberwolves. And again, apparently Alex Rodriguez getting more involved as well. So that's a good thing. And then also there's a lot of reporting out there about how Marc Stad agrees with, Mark Laurie had said some pretty, I would say aggressive things about like, we're not ever moving the team out of Minnesota. Not ever. Like, I'm paraphrasing a little, but not much. Like, that's basically what he said. And Stad is on board with that, reportedly, that he has no interest in moving the team. And also, side note, whenever this comes up, like the league, NBA does not want relocation. The NBA does not. It's not a good look for anybody. You have a whole market of fans that gets ticked off. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And the league is already hell-bent on expansion anyway. So like relocation, it's not a real concern, I don't think, unless they run into some sort of massive hiccup when it comes to the arena. But that, seems unlikely. Right. And then real quickly back to Laurie and the bigger projects. So the new arena and also the TV stuff, and obviously the Timberwolves now taking their own TV in-house, or taking their TV in-house, and who knows what that looks like down the road. But all that stuff Laurie can still be involved in. And there's other, there's Alex Rodriguez has a lot of real estate experience. You've got guys like Michael Bloomberg is involved in the group. He's got media and real estate experience. There's other people involved in the group, undoubtedly, that are going to have opinions when it comes to new arena, whether it's location, the actual build of the arena, some of those other things. And Laurie now, it sounds like, will be more involved, once things get further down that path when it comes to the actual arena piece, and that this still, being a minority owner, still allows him to do that, right? I think the weirdest thing in the whole thing is just how quickly this all took place, right? They'd only been in charge for about 2 years officially. I know they'd been involved since 2021 when the process started, but like they weren't even approved fully until last summer after all the legal stuff. So it's really officially only been a little over a year, even though it's been more like 2 since they've been operating as majority owners. So with all the stuff that Laurie has done in terms of like, there's a lot of turnover on the business side, and I don't want to get super in the weeds on that, but like, I mean, that's a little bit of a tough look, in my opinion, to force so much turnover there and in other places, and then, just be like, see ya. That's a little rough, but by and large, it seems like it's pretty inconsequential. It sounds like, according to John Krasinski, Laurie's going to keep his courtside seats. Who knows how often he'll be there with A-Rod next year. And he like, it's also a little weird because when it initially happened, there was like, Laurie made the comments about how he wanted to own the team for 30 years or something like that. And he did say that. So again, it's tough, but these guys, these entrepreneurs, these billionaires, like, they're on to the next thing. And he already had all these other things going on. And so why not go from a 1.7 billion valuation to a 4.5? And that's exactly what he's doing. I have a couple more thoughts on this, including the 4.5 billion valuation, by the way, is interesting. Got a couple more things to say about that. And then we'll put a bow on the ownership conversation, transition to talking a little bit about Jonathan Kuminga and some of the roster items. But I've got some more thoughts on the ownership stuff and some more, I think, reason for encouragement when it comes to this transition for the Wolves. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's going to hit a homer today, FanDuel's giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. look, sometimes it's just a hitter who's on a hot streak. And right now there's not a whole lot of Twins hitters that are on hot streaks. I guess the rookie, Kalen Culpepper, Luke Keyshaw played really well over the weekend. Maybe pick one of those guys if you just want to pick a Twins player, or it's just a matchup, right? It depends on the ballpark you're playing in, the opposing pitcher, whatever it is. But that's the right route to go, right? It's hot hitter, it's matchup, it's ballpark. Factor that all in. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. A reminder about the Everydayer Club. You can get ad-free episodes of Locked On Wolves, as well as access to the Discord channel by signing up at lockedonwolves.supercast.com. Again, lockedonwolves.supercast.com to get ad-free episodes of Locked On Wolves and access to the Discord channel by becoming a member of the Everydayer Club. All right, couple more ownership thoughts. The $4.5 billion valuation, to me, this is an encouraging thing. And the valuation, by the way, is in line with what we've seen across the league going back just a few years. And so real quickly on that, the Mavs were sold 3 years ago at a $3.5 billion valuation. The Bucks, same thing. They both were around $3.5 billion. And that same year, the Hornets were $3 billion. Now, remember, the Wolves agreement to be sold in 2021 was 1.7, which was a little low at the time. But then by the time the whole thing was said and done, the Wolves were obviously worth more in line with what Charlotte or Milwaukee would have been, 3 to 3.5 billion. The Celtics were sold last year for over $6 billion, which makes sense. And then the Blazers were sold last year to Tom Dundon for $4.25 billion. And then of course the Lakers a year ago were $10 billion, and then now we're over $12 billion, and that's a whole other thing. But the Wolves being sold for $4.5 billion tracks, right? It's a little more than what the Blazers sold for. I guess it was earlier this calendar year, so nearly a year ago, and more than what the Hornets, Bucks, and Mavs were sold for. It seems a little low. And then when you get to the bottom of the article that John Krasinski wrote at The Athletic, he mentioned toward the end of the article, I'll read this one paragraph. Krasinski says, Laurie turned down opportunities to sell his controlling interest for more than the $4.5 billion valuation at which Stad is purchasing it. I think I've been saying Stad. It's Stad is purchasing it. A league source familiar with the market told The Athletic on the condition of anonymity because the discussions were private. But Laurie chose continuity over price tag to ensure all of the work the group has done over the past year could continue uninterrupted. It's encouraging for a couple reasons. One, the Wolves probably were worth, I would assume, closer to $5 billion, right? I think that in terms of how, if you consider how quickly the value of these franchises is increasing, and then also the Wolves just being in a little bit of a better place basketball-wise than, say, Portland, or I would say a more desirable market in some ways than like a Charlotte, and just time has passed since the Dallas sale a few years ago. I would think this team is probably closer to a $5 billion value, but Laurie decided to keep it within the group, within the Rodriguez, Stad, Laurie group, Bloomberg, anybody else that's involved, for continuity's sake. And obviously, he still gets to be involved now. He can still be part of the arena project. He can still be part of this, hopefully, continued ascension of the Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards at the helm. That's great. That's encouraging. It's encouraging, A, that the Wolves probably were worth more than $4.5 billion, and B, that Laurie chose to keep it within the current ownership group, that he wants to still be part of it, and then he decided to do that. That's all really positive. So again, the summary of the whole thing is it's weird. It's I would say even potentially a concerning trend across the league that this many teams are being flipped. I mean, the Lakers and Wolves both have been sold twice now in the last 3 years, at least consummated in the last 2 to 3 years. The sales have been, so that's a bit weird. And there's a lot of groups getting involved, and there's all these other investors and all these. So the whole thing is a little odd. But it's kind of best case scenario. If the Wolves are going to be sold, obviously you'd want there to be as little rocking the boat as possible, and for Laurie to essentially just flip the team to somebody that was already involved and him just take a back seat. Fine, great. A-Rod, obviously vocal, wants to be part of everything. That's good. Everything there seems to be fine. So there's no real concerns in my mind with this transaction. It's just more odd and a little weird and a little I don't know what the right word is. it just feels a little icky is maybe strong because again, Laurie has been great. It's just some of the things he said, obviously things have changed. And so that's a little weird. But in general, I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about. I don't think anything crazy is going to happen on that front. All right. Let's talk about Jonathan Kuminga. So we've talked about Jonathan Kuminga on probably 8 different episodes over the last 2 months or so. As at the start of the offseason, when everybody was still out there on the free agent market, and even I would say after the LaMelo Ball trade, we talked about what do the Wolves do at power forward with Randall and Naz Reid out of the fold. And Kuminga was one of the names on the list, but I had them not as a realistic option for a couple of reasons. I thought Kuminga would get more money. I thought the Wolves may not actually want Jonathan Kuminga because you're talking about a guy who just hasn't been consistent. There's been some behind the scenes stuff. I don't want to say like nothing major off court or anything like that, but clearly hasn't gotten along with the staff or didn't get along with the staff in Golden State with Steve Kerr's staff for the majority of his time there. And it hasn't quite maintained to the level and maintained his play to the level that was expected of him given where he was drafted. And I thought to myself, like spotty defensive player, can run the floor well, but not a great shooter. Everything is just kind of good, not great. And there's still upside, but the consistency is not there. And so I thought, look, he's going to get more money and go somewhere else. But we have to talk about him. Now, you look at the list, I had like 9 or 12 guys that I talked about back in late June, early July. And Kuminga was on there. I think the only guys left are him and Kevin Love, essentially. And obviously very different players and would have very different expectations if either one of them ended up in Minnesota. And to be clear, there's never been any sort of rumor connecting Kevin Love to Minnesota other than some kind of like, whisper type stuff when there was a chance that LeBron could come to Minnesota, which felt like it was an ongoing saga or a never ending saga. And it also feels like it was 14 years ago. But so there's no real steam behind Love to Minnesota that I'm aware of or that I've seen anywhere. But the Kuminga thing won't die. And now most recently, Brian Windhorst on Friday was on, I think it was actually on his podcast. He said his exact words were, watch the Wolves in the next couple of days. And then he went on to talk about DeRozan might sign with the Nuggets, which happened over the weekend. He said the Lakers could do a Kuminga sign and trade, and potentially the Timberwolves could just sign Kuminga. So basically mentioning it was more of a look for what Kuminga could do and then mentioning the Lakers and Wolves as possibilities. I still think he ends up with the Lakers just simply because they can offer more, a little bit more, I think, monetarily. Not a lot more. I think they're also in a bit of a tough spot, but Minnesota can literally only offer the minimum. And look, if it's a 1-year deal, if you're Kuminga, where are you going to get more opportunity? I mean, like, it doesn't really matter in that sense. Like, both teams are going to score a lot of points. They're both playoff teams. I mean, the Wolves are better than the Lakers. So if you want to play with LaMelo and run the floor a little bit, Wolves probably make more sense. If you want to live in LA and play for the Lakers, obviously then the Lakers make more sense there. So it just kind of depends on what you want. And without knowing exactly what Kuminga wants, it seemed to me like the Wolves were further down the list for him because he could go somewhere else and be in a more, what most people would consider a more desirable market and make potentially more money, depending, if he ended up somewhere else and still be on a winning team. But if all things are equal and you just want to win as many games as possible and increase your stock for next offseason, next summer, then the Wolves make a ton of sense. And I would imagine the Wolves are still in on Kuminga. We've heard rumors to suggest that they are. And, I think it makes sense. Not my favorite fit. And if it happens, we'll dig in a little bit more as to the pros and cons of it. I just have the short version. I have concerns about the efficiency of his offense. I have concerns about him being like, ideally the starting power forward is 4th or 5th on the pecking chart offensively, the pecking order. The depth chart is not the right word. But if you look at the offensive pecking order, should be the 4th or 5th option. So in some order with Rudy Gobert, right? Like the basketball is going to be with Ant and LaMelo, and Jaden McDaniels is your 3rd option who continues to increase his scoring, his efficiency, etc. And Kuminga, I don't know that that's necessarily what he wants. Now, in my mind, if you bring in Kuminga and he starts, you're then staggering it. So he's sitting and you bring in a smaller lineup and Io comes out on the floor if he's coming off the bench. You play a smaller, faster lineup, and then Kuminga comes back in and he could play small ball 5. He could play the 4 next to Berenger or whatever. And then I think you'd stagger it. So Kuminga and Ayo are playing more with the second unit, even if Ayo's a starter, so that you have more of the firepower coming from the bench unit. And again, that's something we'll talk about if it happens. But I think that is feasible. Like I think there's an argument to be made that if he runs, even if I'm sure he's going to want to start, and if he's the only power forward on the roster besides Trey Lyles, he will start. But I think allowing him to play more minutes with the bench, and in a perfect world, if you signed him, honestly, I would rather Kuminga come off the bench. And I don't think he's going to sign if they do that. I would rather start Trey Lyles or Josh Green and bring Jonathan Kuminga off the bench and have him run with the second unit with Ayo, with TJ Shannon, and just have this like monstrous like avalanche of offense coming. And then you bring LaMelo in and you play him a few minutes a game with that bench unit. And it's just a track meet. I think there's something there if you can get Kuminga to be okay with it, or if you start him and then you bring him back with the bench for a lot of his minutes. I think that is an intriguing option. Even if Jonathan Kuminga is not my favorite player and I don't think he's a perfect fit, there are pluses, there are pros, there is upside to Kuminga in a Timberwolves uniform, I do believe. All right, let's close by talking a little bit about the rest of the roster, the end of the roster, the Trey Kaufman-Wren puzzle. What do the Wolves do with their unsigned second-round draft pick? We'll do all that here next as we close out today's show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Odoo. Running a business should not feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. And that's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works in one place. Odoo is one platform to manage, grow, and scale your business. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent. It's about having everyone working toward the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business. I've talked about the ownership group when I've talked about Odoo in the past and the continuity there. And look, even with yet another sale, which is weird and a little bit of upheaval, there's still continuity. They're essentially promoting a minority owner to the majority chair and maintaining the same group of folks. The front office is staying the same with Tim Connolly. Everyone's pulling on the same side of the rope. They're all pulling in the same direction. And you still have Chris Finch on the bench for his sixth season upcoming here. It's not just one person. It's all of these people that are involved. Mark Lowry, Alex Rodriguez, Marc Stad, Chris Finch, Tim Connolly, and by and large, a front office, Matt Lloyd, that's been kind of the same guys over the course of the last few years. Look, great organizations win because operations matter. And believe it or not, that is where we are with the Wolves. They're a great organization currently over the last, half decade plus. And that's why you should get Odoo, because great organizations win because operations matter. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's Odoo, ODOO.com/lockedon. All right, so the Timberwolves landscape, or the landscape of the Timberwolves roster right now, I should say, is that there is still an open roster spot. Technically, they could sign two more players, but certainly one more spot they're going to fill. They don't have any two-way contract slots available. And sitting here right now, there are a total of 12 teams that have at least one two-way contract spots full. In fact, it's interesting. The New York Knicks are actually the only team that don't have any of their two-way spots filled. Everybody else has one opening. So the Knicks have 3, and there's 11 other teams. Or I'm sorry, the Knicks have 3, and then there's 12 other teams, so 13 total, that have one two-way spot available. The Timberwolves are chock full. They've got Zion Pullen. They've got Enrique Freeman. They've got Rocco Zikarsky. I don't think Rocco Zikarsky is going anywhere. I don't think Zion Pullen's going anywhere, even though there's a logjam in the Timberwolves backcourt and there's no clear path to him being active, much less playing for the Timberwolves, at least this season. However, the Enrique Freeman slot, as I've mentioned before on the show, it's been a while since we talked about it, I feel like could be had. Enrique Freeman was underwhelming in Summer League. He's undersized for what he is, and I think he's a fringy NBA player, and I actually think if he actually played, he would have a positive impact. He's such a good rebounder. He plays hard. He's good in the open floor. He does a lot of things pretty well, but really nothing besides rebounding is great. And again, he's undersized, which doesn't help the Wolves, who have a lot of undersized guys that can play the 3 and the 4, but also bring more to the table, right? Like Josh Green's a better perimeter defender and a better shooter, and obviously, is more on the 2-3 side than he is a 3-4. Trey Lyles is a has a lot more size and therefore is going to be more reliable, is a better 3-point shooter. There's guys that have advantages over Enrique Freeman. Now, Trey Kaufman-Renn, who's the Timberwolves' second-round pick, remember the 59th overall pick, the second to last pick in the draft, remains unsigned. Now, he's already 24 years old. He played 4 seasons at Purdue, and he is a little bit of just simply like a well-rounded pro, he's just like a lunch pail type guy, which I hate using like generalisms like that. But he's going to play hard. He's going to be in the right spot at the right time. He's a big body. I mean, he's a legit 6'10-ish, good wingspan. And I think for the most part, we'll know where to be and when, which is really important when you're talking about guys who could come in, from the deep bench in a pinch. But there's very little upside. Again, he's already 24. He's not a great outside shooter, but he can shoot a little bit. He like in college, he was a 63% free throw shooter, and he shot threes okay in very low volume over I guess he ended up about 28%. So he doesn't really have range. He's just an okay free throw shooter. It's really more of like he's a low post guy, which the Wolves don't do much of. And he's a good team defender, but he's not a great shot blocker. He's not super switchable on the perimeter. There's just it's nice. It's valuable to have guys like him, and in some ways Enrique Freeman, who are just solid pros and can do a lot of stuff pretty well, but they don't have the one skill that pops, and they're not outstanding at several things or any one thing for that matter. And there's limited upside at this point for both of those guys when it comes to age. I mean, Enrique Freeman, I think he's 26. Kaufman-Renn's 24. So what's going to happen, right? I think there's a chance that the Wolves let go of Enrique Freeman and put Kaufman-Renn on the 2-way just because he's a little younger. There's maybe a little more positional versatility there. Maybe there's some hope to develop a little bit more touch. I just think the offense is so limited. The other options are, I've said all along, is there a way since Summer League, would they let go of Enrique Freeman and sign Nate Santos? Or would they promote even Nate Santos or maybe Zion Pullen, but I think given the roster balance, probably not him. Could one of those guys fill the final roster spot and they put Kaufman-Renn on a 2-way? Or they could give Kaufman-Renn a partially guaranteed roster contract and put him on the roster. That's my bet. This is what I think happens. Sitting here right now on August 24th, I think the Timberwolves will they're saving that roster spot in case they get a Kuminga, right? If they don't, Kaufman-Renn will get a partially guaranteed contract, a standard contract, and the Wolves would have the option to waive him in January or pay the rest of his contract out, just like they're doing with Trey Lyles. And then I think they keep their 2-ways through into training camp, and then they'll invite all these other guys on Exhibit 10 contracts, which are like preferred walk-on type contracts is what I like to call them, where you get essentially guaranteed money for signing, like $80K or $90K, and then you get an inside track if you stick with the G League team. You get paid more if you're with the G League team for like 2 months or something. But I think the Wolves will give Exhibit 10s to Nate Santos, among others. And then I think when it's all said and done in training camp, the Wolves have a track record of kind of shuffling those 2-way slots. I bet the Wolves would let go of potentially Enrique Freeman and then sign a Nate Santos or somebody who's a bit more flexible positionally, can do a few more things at an NBA level very clearly, and give him a 2-way deal. And again, Kaufman-Renn on a partially guaranteed standard contract. That's my guess, just based on the Timberwolves' history, recent history, what they've done, and reading the tea leaves based on what we saw in Summer League and what each of these guys is capable of doing. So a complete estimation here in late August, and we will see. And obviously, if they sign Kuminga, perhaps none of that is correct, and we'll have to recalibrate on what my prediction is for what happens with those roster spots and those players. So we will dig in on that here a little bit later this week as stuff continues to happen. I mean, the DeMar DeRozan, I could have spent a little more time on the disaster that has been the Nuggets last few days. Perhaps we'll talk about that Wednesday. The Nuggets have, willingly decided to move on from Peyton Watson and bring in DeMar DeRozan, which is certainly a choice. So we'll talk about that perhaps later this week. I'll be back on Wednesday, still doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday shows. If anything major happens, we'll do an emergency show in the middle here, a bonus episode. So keep an eye out just in case a Kuminga signing or anything else major goes down. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. A reminder, you can sign up for the Everydayer Club and get ad-free audio episodes of Locked On Wolves and access the Discord chat. You can sign up at lockedonwolves.supercast.com for to become a member of the Everyday Club. Again, that's lockedonwolves.supercast.com. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.